Hello and welcome to the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Peter Houston, and this season, Esther Thorpe, Chris Sutcliffe and I are exploring the people and products powering publishing, both through this podcast and their adjacent weekly newsletter, the Publisher Newsletter, which you can sign up for at voices.media. We're delighted to welcome BlueConic on board as sponsors for this season of the Publisher Podcast and the Publisher Newsletter. BlueConic is a customer data operating system that makes your data work harder, so you don't have to. Whether it's capturing valuable audience insights or activating them with precision, the possibilities are endless with BlueConic's all-in-one platform. Learn more at BlueConic.com, where data is for doing. I'm back with an interview that was an absolute joy to do. I'm talking to Rhiannon Davies, founder of the wonderful Greater Govanhill magazine. We talked about how the Extraordinary Fonts podcast, winner of this year's Publisher Podcast Award for a limited series, fits with the Greater Govanhill mission to serve the local community. We also spoke about the mechanics of community building, whether you publish for a particular postcode, a special interest group, or a B2B vertical. But first, I asked Rhiannon to tell me Greater Govanhill's origin story.
So Greater Govanhill is a community magazine and media project, and I launched it back in 2020. And I launched it after having moved here to Govanhill in 2018 and just getting really sort of struck by the way that Govanhill was often described in the media and on social media versus the reality of living in here. And where it was often described was in quite negative terms. But what I found was a really warm, vibrant community with loads of people and projects and activism and people making stuff happen. And there wasn't enough focus on that. And so the idea for the magazine, I've got a background in journalism and magazines with a particular interest in solutions journalism and constructive journalism. And what I was interested in the magazine was trying to shift the narrative around Govanhill, but not ignore the problems that exist, but do it from a solutions-focused way so we could actually think about what could be done about some of those issues. And providing a platform for voices you don't typically hear in the media, because I saw that too often Govanhill had its story told about it by others as opposed to letting people tell their own story and telling the stories that matter to them. And so the magazine was launched in 2020. We also have a website. We have a occasional radio show. We've done a podcast. We now have a community newsroom space. We do a lot of events and training and workshops and kind of outreach stuff with different marginalised communities. And we also run the Scottish Beacon, or set up the Scottish Beacon, which is a collaborative of independent community-based publications all around Scotland. So there's a fair few arms and legs that it's grown since it started.
So, I mean, Govanhill, not everyone will know Govanhill is a district in Glasgow. It's very well known. Well, Nicola Sturgeon was its MSP, but it's well known, I guess, for the diversity of the population. You've told me before, but the number of languages spoken in the district is crazy, right? It's dozens.
Yeah, so it has this long history of migration into the area. So when the tenements were first built, they were housing people coming from the Highlands and Islands and Ireland, and then later on Italian people and Jewish people, Pakistani and Bangladeshi people, Eastern European people and Roma people have all kind of come in kind of larger groups and made this home. But then there's also, because it has this huge diversity and kind of melting pot feel, a lot of people from all over the world also sort of come in and make their home here in Govanhill. So there was a survey done in 2020 which found 88 languages spoken by people who live in the area.
Wow.
Which is quite amazing and quite unique in Scotland. I don't think there's anywhere else in Scotland that has quite such diversity in such a small neighbourhood.
Yeah. So you've launched that magazine in 2020, and since then, I've looked at the list of awards that you've won, and it's extensive, right? You've won a fair few awards. I used this phrase of punching above its weight, which you've heard before. What's going on there? Why have you been so successful?
Good question. You might have to ask the judges, but I think one of the reasons why we maybe stand out or have been fortunate to win these awards, a couple of reasons maybe. One is that we're not afraid to sort of do things that journalists don't always do. So to recognise that maybe the journalist isn't the person with all the answers. I've come from a background of doing community development as well as doing journalism and communications and magazines and training and events and everything else. So I think that has very much influenced the work that we do. So rather than having this kind of objective myth of the journalist sitting outside the stories and sitting outside the project and sitting outside the publication, we really wanted to recognise that more voices, more diversity need to be in the media and to bring them in. So I think there's a different approach that we do that tends to get recognised sometimes. And I think the other thing is just really focusing on quality. I could have produced a magazine or a newsletter that was sort of flung together and printed on some A4 and passed out, and it might have, people might have read it and it might have been okay. But I wanted to create something that was, that was beautiful, that made people feel proud when they saw it, that made people feel like that they deserve to have something of this quality, that, people tell me that they keep the magazine, they keep all the issues and they have it on their coffee tables or on their bookshelves and they show their visitors, or they send it to family back home in a different country, or they send it to people that used to live here and moved out of the area. I think creating something of quality and kind of maintaining high standards in everything that we do has, again, sort of made it stand apart from other sort of similar sized publications.
How often are you publishing the magazine?
So currently it's bi-monthly. It started off as quarterly and it moved to bi-monthly. So we now produce, it's an A4 magazine that is currently 36 pages. It used to be 52 when it was quarterly and we reduced it. We do sort of 5 or 6 issues a year.
And it's funded by local advertising? Because it's free, right? It's
free, and that was really important to us because there is a high level of kind of economic deprivation in Govanhill, that we never wanted it to be out of the reach or out of the hands of people that might most benefit from the stories that were within it. So being free and having no paywall on the website is really important to us. It's funded through a mix of things. We have local advertising, so mostly from local independent businesses or charities or social enterprises that see the value in it and, want to support it as well. We have members who might pay £3 or £5 or £10 a month. They get the magazine sent to them if they want. They get invited along to our editorial meetings. They might get some merch or the kind of perks as well. But really, they're people that we sort of say, if you like the magazine and you can afford to pay a few quid each month, then that helps to keep it free for everyone else. So that's the sort of selling point of our membership. We also get some grants. So we're set up as a social enterprise, which means that we can apply for some grants. So we have had particular funding to do particular projects. That might be working with a group of people who've been through the asylum system to create a radio show, or maybe it's working with young people who find themselves underrepresented in the media to learn some new skills. So we do that kind of work, which feeds into our output, so it's not completely separate from it, but it very much enriches all the kind of outputs that we do. And then increasingly now we're also doing bits of consultancy, so supporting other communities to launch their own media projects, or supporting other media or non-media organisations to be more community focused in the work that they do.
I can't remember where I read it, but I'm sure I read it. And it might have been a judge in one of these competitions that said every town in Britain should have a magazine like this. And I know you and I have spoken before about that as an ambition. I don't think you've ever said you wanted every town in Britain to have a magazine like Govanhill, but you've said before that you wanted to spread that kind of format to other places, and that's the work you're doing with Scottish Beacon, is that right?
Well, not exactly. So that is really important to us, not because we think everyone and everywhere should have a publication exactly like Greater Govanhill, but that we do think, that having local media that celebrates the local community but also informs and explores difficult issues is really important and makes a huge difference to a community in terms of the connection that people to have to their neighbours and neighbourhoods. So there's an ambition there to not spread out and run publications all over the country, but to share the learnings that we have to support other communities to have their own media projects. So we are working on how to do that and developing different tools and resources around that. The Scottish Beacon is a bit separate. So the Scottish Beacon is a collaborative network which was launched in 2023, so about a year ago, in fact. I think I just missed the anniversary. I should have done something for that. Never mind.
That means you've been busy, right?
Definitely. So this is actually more about connecting established networks, so established publications.
Right.
So there's 24 publications currently in the network. And what I've found, being a founder of a publication, was that whenever I spoke to someone else who's doing something similar or not similar, but in the same field in a different part of the country, we always got so much out of that conversation. There was always so much to learn and to share with each other. And yet there wasn't anything in Scotland that was connecting up these independent publishers. So the Scottish Beacon exists both as a network to connect independent community-based publishers, but also to try and amplify the stories that come out of those communities. So we know that, the national media is doing what it can with its limited resources and increasingly or decreasing kind of resources that it has, but it can't be everywhere. And what we have is this network of brilliant journalists who care about their communities, publishing stories that might be quite small local stories when you take them by itself. But if you start thinking about, for example, a village hall closing in one village, and if it's happening in 10 villages, then that becomes a bigger story and there's a bigger kind of national attention which should be drawn to that. So we're thinking about how we can work together to amplify the stories that come out of those communities.
That idea of collaboration really sits at the heart of everything you do, right? Whether it's collaborating with a local community, whether it's collaborating with other publications. I mean, is that where we're going? Is that what we all need to be doing? Is rather than competing with each other, should we all be working together?
I mean, I would say yes. I think that's a huge thing for me. I think particularly, you look at the state of the journalism industry and its decline as the business models fall out and as people are still struggling to do really important work that has a huge amount of value. And if we don't start collaborating, then we're just going to kind of race to the bottom. But by collaborating, we can lift each other up, we can strengthen each other's work, and we can find new ways to keep telling the stories that need to be heard.
I mean, I saw this the other day with two of the bigger publishers. One was definitely in media. I'm not sure who the other one was. It might have been EMAP. And they were collaborating on AI, which I just thought was fascinating. These people that, were going toe-to-toe at one point on the newsstand. And now they're getting together and saying, well, this is what we learned. I definitely think there's something changed there.
Yeah, and there's also really interesting examples of bigger publishers and smaller publishers collaborating to each other's benefit as well. I was in the US last year visiting innovative local media projects, and there was loads of great collaborations happening where big publishers are saying we couldn't get these stories that local publishers get because they're there on the ground, and the local publishers saying we couldn't get the reach that we have had without working with these big publishers. So there's loads of examples like that as well.
So one of the awards that you won was our podcast award for Fonds, which is just the most amazing series. I loved it so much. And you talked earlier about getting other voices involved. This literally is about getting community voices. Can you talk a little bit about Fonds and where the idea came from and what you hope to achieve from it?
Yeah, so Fonds is a project that's been going now since I think we began it in 2022. And the idea came initially, there was a new mural that was launched in Govanhill. It's this beautiful mural done by local artists with the letters of Govanhill, and each letter was painted with a pattern. And it had been done in collaboration with a community group. And I was talking to the people that had done it, and they were telling me what we did was we got this group of diverse people together, and we asked them to sort of share something from their home that had a pattern or colour or something that had meaning to them. And then we took the patterns and we put them in each of the letters of Govanhill, and we made this beautiful mural. And I was like, that's brilliant. I love that idea. But I want to know about the objects. So, what are the objects that inspired those patterns? I'd love to see those. So I was talking to the people behind that project, and I was also talking to a photographer who was doing an artist residency in Govanhill, also working with groups of diverse people, and we just kind of got together. And we all had the same idea. Basically, was let's do a project where we focus on these objects that matter to people. So we worked with Morwenna Kersley to ask people, who's the photographer, to ask people to share an object that was special to them. And it was amazing, the people that came forward. So in the first year we had, I think, 25. We maybe had another 25 in the second year. And because of Govanhill being such a diverse community, a lot of the people that came have originally come from other countries, and so the object had even more meaning because it was something that they brought with them from the other country that connected them to home, to family, or some link between them and maybe what they'd left behind. And the way that Moreno photographed them was quite unique. So she works in this completely pitch black room where she'd put the object on this silky satin background inspired by old kind of advertising photography. And then over the course of an 8-minute exposure on film, she would use this torch to kind of paint with light, she describes it as, and just sort of moving the torch around the object and creating these really just beautiful images that are quite almost ethereal, and they just really make these objects kind of sing. And as she was doing that over an 8-minute exposure, we interviewed the participants about the object. And what we found was that it created this really intimate interview, unlike any I've ever done before, because you were sitting in pitch black and the only thing that you could see was this thing that was very special to them. And so in the first year, we weren't actually thinking about a podcast. We were just trying to capture those stories. In the first year, we created an exhibition where we put the pictures in shop windows. So it was an outside exhibition that everyone could go and see without having to go into a gallery. And then we put the little stories on postcards, and we put the postcards in the shop so people that would then go into the shop and they collect all the postcards. And we loved doing that. And so when we had the chance to do it again the second year, we said we need to do something more with these stories because the audio is also really beautiful. So we worked with Flora Zajijak, who is a great podcast producer who lives locally as well. And she worked to sort of turn these interviews into beautiful, quite short, kind of usually about 8 to 10, 12 minutes podcasts that just allow that person to speak. We don't interject, we don't add comment, we don't add anything else. We just try and take the listener into that room to understand what it means to hear this story and to hear what this thing means to them.
I admit it's a beautiful series. It's just really, really nice. And quite moving at points, when people are talking about where they've come from and the relationship with the object. But I'm looking at that, and we started this conversation with you talking about solutions journalism. And then there's this beautiful podcast series, which was almost an art project. And I'm just trying to figure out, how do those fit together? What's the relationship there?
I guess for us, what kind of links all of our work is listening, and not just going in there thinking, we know how to do journalism, we know how to tell a story, we know what the problem is here, we know what we need to highlight, but actually listening to what people have to share. So when it comes to solutions journalism, that might be listening to what our local group is doing to tackle, what might be a big issue, but they're doing it in this very sort of small, local way, and trying to highlight that. When it comes to fund, again, it's listening to stories that kind of create empathy. And one of the big things that we're trying to do with Greater Govanhill is just to break down some of the barriers that exist between people. And one of the most kind of impactful things someone's ever said about the magazine was I think it was even during COVID, and they were saying, I'm stuck at home, I'm having to shield, I feel quite isolated. But reading the magazine makes me feel more connected to both my neighbours and my neighbourhood. And for me, that's the point. So the funds help you to understand other people. And people have said that about funds as well, that now they might walk down the street and they see someone and they know something quite personal about them. And that's quite a nice feeling to suddenly have these kind of connections that you're building within your neighbourhood. And for me, building connections in your neighbourhood it's the first step to making change happen. If you suddenly start talking to people who live in your tenement, if you have a WhatsApp group for your street, you can affect change. And all of our work is about trying to connect people, break down barriers, but also drive positive social change. Think about how we can make the neighbourhood better, how people can live better, how people can feel like they're part of something. So all of our work kind of ties into those goals, really.
We started talking today about you wanted to make something beautiful, and Fonz is a big part of that, and the magazine's part of that. So if we take that kind of quality thing as a given, if we set the bar really high and we're all trying to make really great quality content, that's still only part of the story, right? The other part is connecting all those people and what you've just talked about. So if I'm not making a local publication or a neighbourhood publication, I'm making a B2B publication or I'm making a niche specialist publication. What's the mechanics of bringing that community together? What's the steps that you take to make those people feel like, yeah, I belong under this umbrella?
I think, again, it comes back to listening. But before I launched the magazine, I spent about a year in 2019 just going out and speaking to anyone that would speak to me. So I'd go to businesses, I'd go to bus stops, I'd go to cafes, I'd go to organisations, I'd go to anyone that would chat to me and talk about this idea that I thought I had for this magazine and what would people want from it. And all of those conversations, and then, online surveys and drop-in events and things, all really informed what the magazine became. And that meant when people saw the magazine, they're like, oh, I had that idea. They did that thing. And they actually did listen to me. They valued what I had to say. And now we're at a point 4 years on where we've grown all these arms and legs. We've grown a team. We're doing all this stuff all the time. And what we've been doing for the past couple of months is just actually saying, let's have a pause and let's go back and do that again, because things have changed. The neighbourhood has changed. People have moved in. People have moved out. Our team is new. They weren't around at that time. So let's go back and do that again. So for the past 2 months, we've been doing the same exercise. Me and my team have been going out, chatting to anyone that would chat to us, talking to organisations, going for coffee with people, and just listening again. And I think if you listen, then you give people that sense of being valued, being heard, but you also, they buy into the project, they buy into the product, and they feel that sense of belonging. The magazine is there to reflect them and their community. And by doing that in an authentic way, in an honest way, we're not just doing it to tick a box, we're not just doing it to say that we've done it, and we're actually listening. And I think that is sometimes when you're busy in the act of producing a magazine or whatever it is you're busy with, it's very hard to be still enough to do that, to find the quietness that you need to be able to properly hear. But when you do, and when you take that on board and then you invite people in, so we've had, through when it was the long lockdown and kind of over that COVID winter, we had Saturday morning Zooms every morning. We would just open them up to anyone who wanted to come along and just chat about what's going on in the neighbourhood, what's going on in the magazine. I would tell them about the behind the scenes stuff. People talk about how they want to get involved and just find spaces for connection. We now have a newsroom space we can invite people into here. We do open house editorial meetings kind of once a month, where we invite people who care about different topics to come and talk about that topic. So anything, I think, and I know that we are working in a local community, so it's easier for us to do than if you work across the UK or internationally. But I think anything you can do to invite people in, that might be digitally, it might be through phone calls, it might be on a Zoom, or it might be something else. But giving people that sense of belonging and ownership and connection, not just to you, but also to each other, has really helped.
So I'm start thinking that all makes absolute sense. But I'm wondering, what's the starting point? What's the starting point that gets people to give up their time to help you figure out what you want to do for them?
I think understanding what their needs are, what their pains are, what would make their life better, what they don't know that they need to know. So again, something we're working at the moment is really sort of having a bit of a shift towards service journalism. So understanding what our community's information gaps are, what people struggle with, what people would like to find out about, how they would like to live better in their neighbourhood. So by trying to, as part of our listening project, trying to understand those gaps and then think about how we can meet those gaps. The same way that if you set up any business or enterprise or organisation, if you just do what you want to do without kind of consulting people, then you probably find that you don't have an audience, you don't have a customer base. But if you understand your customer base and you understand what their needs are, then you can design a product that meets those needs. And that's what we're trying to do. So
bringing it back into the organisation then. So I've had my conversations. I've heard all these different points of view. I've got to bring that back into the organisation. What does that look like? Are you sat just with a big long list and figuring out which ones are the most important?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, for example, we just did a citizens agenda project for the general election, and we had the same sort of process where we wanted to flip our coverage from rather being about what the politicians and party machines wanted to talk about. We wanted to know what our local readers wanted their candidates to talk about. So we went and we did vox pops on the streets. We went along to community groups. We did an online survey. We held events, and we asked them, what do you want the candidates to be talking about? And from that, we got this list of 300 odd comments that we then filtered through. We kind of worked out what were the key themes which kept on coming up. We worked out what the key questions which were most relevant to people that were coming up. And then once we got what we thought was the correct list, we put that out again and said, here's what we think we're hearing from you guys. Is this right? These are the questions we should be asking. And then once we got those questions back, we then put that to the candidates. We then published all their responses. And lots of people said that really helped because that they actually spoke about the things that I wanted to know about. So again, it's that kind of iterative process of not just saying, right, we've done that, so now we know everything and we're going to go away and create something, but actually keep on just checking in. And again, the authenticity of actually really wanting to know whether or not you're getting it right and being okay with sometimes getting it wrong, but as long as you can learn from that. And again, it's that I think sometimes there's a lot of tradition in how journalism is done. There's a lot of ego involved in journalism. We all have one. But you have to sort of push that aside and have a lot of humility in your approach. And by doing that and not thinking that you know everything, you end up creating something quite different a lot of the time.
What you're actually doing is you're filtering the community's questions to put to the people that need to answer them, and then feeding that back to the community that's asking the questions in the first place. So my question for you, I guess from a publisher point of view, is we're now talking, what you're talking about is a neighbour, almost a postcode scale, rather than Facebook scale or whatever, that old internet scale. In that sense, scale's gone. We're now talking about really not hyper-local, like in the sense that the issues are hyper-local. It's not about there's a pothole in this corner. It's about real life societal issues, but filtered through that community. Was there even a question in there? Was that total rambling?
No, I thought that was nicely articulated. Yeah, and I agree. For me, I think you have to work at these kind of... For me, there's more of a future in niche publications, in community publications and hyperlocal publications, because you have a better opportunity to know your audience, to speak to your audience, for them to speak to you. Now, journalism used to be this very much a one-way street where you'd write your article, you took it over the wall, and then you get on with your next one. That doesn't make sense in today's world, today's digital world. People want to have a voice. People want to be involved. People want to know that someone's listening when they talk. So by doing that at a very small local level, I think you have a much better chance of actually succeeding and meeting their needs. I mean, when I set up Greater Govanhill, I could have made it a South Side magazine. So Greater Govanhill sits within the South Side. The South Side is made up of a whole bunch of neighbourhoods. That would have given me much bigger audience. It would have given me much bigger advertising possibilities. It would give me much bigger revenue possibilities. But by diluting it, then I wouldn't have been able to speak to and with the Greater Govanhill community, who have different lives and different expectations and different needs than the people in the next community over, because they're different demographics, different levels of wealth. And if I was making something for a wealthier neighbourhood, then it wouldn't necessarily serve the Govanhill neighbourhood. So for me, it's all about service, actually, in what we do as well. Okay,
my last question for you then. If we accept that Greater Govanhill is punching above its weight, what's your advice to any other publisher that wants to be punching above their weight?
There's lots of things I've spoken about already around listening and knowing your audience and having humility. But I think also sort of there's a thing about sticking with your guns. I could have done something completely different that was more traditional that other people might expect me to do. But that wasn't right. That wasn't what I heard. That wasn't what seemed to be most fitting. So I think sometimes just believing that, if you're hearing something that you think is a good idea and you think it's a good idea, then going with it and not afraid to be a bit different, but also just making sure to bring in standards and quality and know where your standards are, and knowing that you don't want to sort of slip below them, because if you start slipping, then you no longer have the thing that you wanted to create. So I think maintaining standards, but also kind of not being afraid to be different.
A massive thank you to Rhiannon for taking the time to speak to us. Don't forget we have a write-up of the key learnings from this interview on voices.media, or dropping into your inbox every Tuesday if you sign up to the publisher newsletter, also on voices.media. This season is sponsored by BlueConic, the operating system that puts data into action for marketing and growth doers. The industry-first solution empowers doers with an unmatched range of capabilities to access relevant customer data, create resonant customer experiences, and drive maximum returns for their business. Learn more at BlueConic.com, where data is for doing. We're back next week with another deep dive into the people and the products powering publishing's future. Until then, keep up with all things Media Voices by following us on LinkedIn and subscribing to our weekly newsletter over on voices.media. Bye!